Welcome to Wonderful Stories, a place where imagination comes alive. So let's begin.
Part 1. The Man Who Was Not Supposed to Be Loved. The first time Crown Prince Adrien Laurent saw President Elias Navarro in person, the entire world pretended not to notice the electricity. The kingdom of Valoria was centuries old, gilded halls, inherited power, bloodline politics. Across the ocean stood the Republic of Astera, modern, democratic, sharp-edged and efficient. They were allies by treaty, rivals by pride, opposites by ideology, and yet, that evening, beneath crystal chandeliers in Valoria's grand palace, none of that seemed to matter. The state banquet glittered like a constellation fallen to earth. Gold-rimmed glasses, silk gowns, military uniforms polished to mirror brightness. Cameras flashed, diplomats smiled with carefully measured teeth. Prince Adrien stood at the top of the marble staircase, every inch the heir to the throne. Tall, composed, impossibly elegant in white ceremonial attire threaded with gold. He had been trained since birth to be unshakable. He was not trained for this. President Elias Navarro entered the hall with no crown, no jewels, no inherited throne, only presence. Dark suit, silver tie, eyes like a storm gathering patience. He was younger than most presidents in history. Charismatic, brilliant, untouchable. The crowd parted for him as if instinctively aware that he commanded not through lineage, but through will. Adrien watched him descend the red carpet. Elias looked up, their eyes met, and something shifted, not dramatic, not visible, just a quiet click, like a lock turning somewhere deep inside. The announcer's voice echoed, His Royal Highness, Crown Prince Adrien Laurent of Valoria, His Excellency, President Elias Navarro of Astera. They met at the center of the hall. The handshake was firm, too firm. Adrien leaned slightly closer, just enough for etiquette, not scandal. Welcome to Valoria, Mr. President. Elias's lips curved faintly. Thank you, Your Highness. I've heard your country is beautiful. Adrien's reply came smooth. It depends who is looking at it. A flicker, a challenge accepted. The evening unfolded in layers of diplomacy and tension. They were seated beside each other by strategic design, the alliance between monarchy and republic under careful negotiation. But conversation strayed. It always did. You don't believe in inherited power, Adrien said softly as applause thundered around them for some minister's speech. I believe in earned responsibility, Elias replied. And if responsibility is inherited, then the heir must prove they deserve it. Adrien's smile was controlled. You assume I haven't. Elias turned fully toward him now, gaze steady, assessing. Oh, I don't assume anything about you. The air thickened. For a moment, they were not prince and president. Just two men measuring the other's strength. Later that night, on a palace balcony overlooking the illuminated city, Adrien stepped outside for air. He expected solitude. Instead, he found Elias already there, leaning against the stone railing. City lights in his eyes. You left early, Elias said without turning. So did you. Silence settled comfortably. From below, music drifted upward. You represent tradition, Elias said finally. I represent change, and you think those things cannot coexist. I think they rarely survive each other. Adrien stepped closer. Not touching, never touching. You speak as if you've already decided I'm your enemy. Elias's voice softened, almost imperceptibly. I haven't decided anything about you. A pause. Then Adrien asked the question neither of them should have entertained. And if we weren't crown prince and president? Elias finally turned to face him. If we weren't, he said quietly, this would already be dangerous. The word hung between them. Dangerous. Adrien's heartbeat betrayed him for the first time in years. You're aware, Adrien said carefully, that even standing here like this is politically unwise. Elias's gaze dropped briefly to Adrien's lips. I'm aware, and yet you haven't stepped away. No, Elias admitted. Neither had Adrien. The wind shifted. The palace guards below rotated posts. Reality returned. Footsteps approached from inside. Adrien straightened instantly, mask back in place. Elias's expression returned to presidential composure. By the time an aide stepped onto the balcony, they were standing at proper diplomatic distance. Untouchable, unreachable, unreadable. That night, headlines flooded the world. Historic alliance talks between Valoria and Astera. Crown Prince and President display remarkable rapport. No one saw the balcony moment. No one saw the way Adrien stared at the closed doors long after Elias had left. No one saw Elias in his presidential suite, jacket discarded, staring at his phone with Adrien's contact information saved under an unassuming alias. 3 days later, negotiations continued behind closed doors. Trade, military cooperation, Cultural exchange. Every meeting was professional. Every glance was not. In a private conference chamber lined with oil paintings of former monarchs, Adrian and Elias found themselves briefly alone between delegations. "You're staring," Elias said quietly. "I'm thinking. That's rarely safe around me, apparently." Adrian stepped closer than protocol allowed. "You said if we weren't who we are, this would already be dangerous." Elias's breath hitched. "Just slightly." "Yes." Adrian's voice lowered. "What if I don't care about safe?" Silence. "Not the comfortable kind. The kind that threatens to rewrite history." Elias's jaw tightened. "You don't get that luxury," he said. "Neither of us do." Adrian searched his face. For once, Adrian whispered, "I'd like to choose something for myself." The words were raw, unfiltered, human. Elias looked at him then, not as a symbol, not as a political figure. As a man, and that was worse, because it made it real. Footsteps returned. Doors opened. Advisors entered. Masks snapped back into place. But something irreversible had already begun. That night, a secure encrypted message arrived on Adrian's private device. Unknown sender. One line. Tomorrow, 11 p.m., East Garden Pavilion. No security. Adrian didn't hesitate. He deleted the message, and memorized it. The East Garden Pavilion was centuries old, stone arches, moonlit ivy, silence guarded only by distance from the main palace. At 10:58 p.m., Adrian arrived first. At 11:02, Elias stepped from the shadows. No titles, no aides, no flags, just them. "This is reckless," Elias said quietly. "Yes, and you're still here. So are you." For a long moment, they simply looked at one another. No cameras, no governments, no history. Elias stepped closer. "So tell me, Adrian," he murmured, using his name for the first time without honorifics. "What exactly are we doing?" Adrian didn't answer with words. He reached forward, slowly enough to allow retreat. Elias didn't retreat. Their hands touched. Electric, forbidden, unforgivable, and neither of them pulled away. Somewhere inside the palace walls, surveillance cameras rotated. Somewhere across the ocean, political rivals watched for weakness. Somewhere in the future, consequences were already forming. But under the moonlight, in that stolen moment between monarchy and republic, the crown prince kissed the president. And the world did not know it had just changed. Part 2, The Weight of a Crown, The Cost of a Vote. The kiss lasted only seconds. But it rewrote everything. It wasn't reckless or desperate. It was careful, almost reverent. A press of lips that felt less like impulse and more like recognition. Like two forces that had been orbiting each other finally colliding. When they separated, neither of them spoke immediately. Moonlight spilled across the stone floor of the East Garden Pavilion. The ivy along the arches rustled softly in the night breeze. Somewhere in the distance, palace guards changed posts, unaware that history had just fractured quietly beneath their feet. Elias's hand was still wrapped around Adrian's wrist. "That," Elias said softly, his voice steadier than he felt, "cannot happen again." Adrian didn't move away. "Then why did you let it?" A flicker passed through Elias's eyes, frustration, restraint, something dangerously close to longing. "Because I'm human," he replied. "And because you looked at me like I wasn't a position." Adrian swallowed. "You're not." Silence fell again, heavier now. Elias stepped back first. That's exactly the problem. The following morning, the world resumed as if nothing had shifted. Negotiation chambers buzzed with economic proposals. Advisors whispered strategy. Reporters speculated about trade tariffs and defense cooperation. Crown Prince Adrian Laurent entered the council room in flawless composure. President Elias Navarro followed moments later, expression unreadable. No one would have guessed that only hours before, their hands had been tangled in ivy-shadowed stone. They sat across from each other at the long mahogany table. Professional, measured, distant. If anything, they were colder than before. And that was the first crack. Adrian's chief advisor, Lord Harrington, noticed it immediately. "Your Highness," Harrington murmured later in private, "you appear distracted." Adrian adjusted his cufflinks calmly. "Negotiations are complex." "Yes," Harrington said carefully. "But complexity does not usually unsettle you." Adrian's gaze hardened slightly. "Then perhaps this time it should." Harrington bowed, but suspicion lingered in his eyes. Across the palace compound, in the secured presidential wing, Elias was having a different conversation. "You've requested an unscheduled walk through the East Gardens last night?" his security director asked. "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." The director's expression was tight. "With respect, Mr. President, this is a foreign monarchy. Risk assessments." "I'm aware of the risks," Elias interrupted. And that was true, just not the kind they were calculating. That evening, a state reception was held in honor of the alliance progress. Music filled the ballroom again. Crystal chandeliers shimmered. Adrian stood beside Elias during a ceremonial toast. Their shoulders brushed once. It was accidental. It was devastating. Elias leaned slightly closer under the applause. "We cannot do this again," he murmured, barely audible. Adrian's expression remained serene. "You keep saying that, because it's true. And yet," Adrian said softly, "you came last night." Elias's jaw tightened. "You're going to be king one day. And you were elected by millions who believe in you," Adrian countered. "We both belong to systems bigger than ourselves." "Yes." Adrian's voice dropped. "But systems don't feel like this." For the first time, Elias faltered. Later that night, Adrian found himself unable to sleep. The crown weighed heavier than usual. He had spent his entire life being molded into a sovereign, taught diplomacy before desire, duty before identity. Love, if it ever came, was supposed to be strategic. Appropriate, approved, politically advantageous. Not this. Not a president from a republic whose very existence challenged monarchical authority. Not a man whose strength came from ballots instead of bloodlines. Adrian stepped onto his private balcony and froze. Elias stood below in the courtyard garden, looking up, reckless. Adrian descended without thinking. When they met beneath the stone archway, neither pretended this was coincidence. "You shouldn't be here," Adrian whispered. "I know. Your security thinks I'm reviewing tomorrow's policy brief." Adrian exhaled slowly. "You're impossible." Elias's lips curved faintly. "So I've been told." This time, they didn't hesitate. They moved toward each other like gravity had made the decision for them. The kiss was deeper, less tentative, more dangerous. Adrian's hand slid to Elias's waist. Elias's fingers curled into the fabric of Adrian's shirt. It felt inevitable, and terrifying. When they broke apart, breathing uneven, Elias rested his forehead briefly against Adrian's. "This will ruin us," he said. Adrian didn't disagree. "Yes." Elias searched his face. "Then why does it feel like the first honest thing I've done in years?" Adrian closed his eyes briefly. "Because it is. But secrets, no matter how carefully hidden, always cast shadows." 2 floors above, behind a half-drawn curtain, Lord Harrington stood watching the courtyard. He didn't see faces clearly. He didn't need to. He saw proximity, intimacy, impropriety, and Harrington was loyal to the crown before all else, including Adrian. The next morning, negotiations took a sharper turn. Trade concessions stalled. Military clauses became tense. Advisors whispered about political leverage. Elias sensed it immediately. Something had shifted. In a private break between sessions, he cornered Adrian in a side corridor lined with portraits of former kings. "What happened?" Elias asked quietly. Adrian's expression was controlled, too controlled. "Nothing." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Pretend this is coincidence." Adrian looked at him fully then. "My advisor suspects." Elias went still. "How much?" "Enough." Silence thickened. Elias's voice dropped to a whisper. "If this becomes public, my father would consider it a constitutional crisis. And my opposition party would call for impeachment," Elias finished. The weight of reality slammed between them. Adrian's hand twitched, wanting to reach, not daring to. "We stop," Elias said firmly. "Now." Adrian's chest tightened. "And go back to what?" "Polite hostility." "Yes." The word hurt more than it should have. "Can you?" Adrian asked. Elias didn't answer immediately. He looked at Adrian, not as a prince, not as a symbol. As the man he had kissed twice under moonlight. "No," Elias admitted quietly. "Neither can I," Adrian said. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. They stepped apart instantly. Masks restored. Distance imposed. But the damage was already done. That night, an anonymous message reached Elias's secured diplomatic inbox. No sender. No signature. Just a photograph. Grainy. Taken from above. 2 silhouettes in a courtyard. Close. Too close. Beneath it, a single sentence. "The world would be very interested in this." Elias stared at the screen, pulse steady only by force. The threat had arrived sooner than expected. Across the palace, Adrian received a similar message. Same photo. Different line. "The crown cannot afford weakness." Adrian's grip tightened around the device. For the first time, fear outweighed desire. This was no longer just about longing. It was about power. About institutions. About survival. At midnight, Adrian stood alone in the East Garden Pavilion. He hadn't sent a message. He hadn't planned to come. But he knew Elias would be there. And he was. They faced each other in silence. "This is escalating," Elias said. "Yes." They're testing us. Yes. Elias stepped closer, not touching. If we continue, they will destroy us. Adrian's voice was steady. Then we don't get caught. Elias almost laughed. You sound like a reckless prince in a scandalous novel. Adrian's gaze softened. Perhaps I'm tired of being the perfect heir. And I'm tired of being the untouchable president, Elias admitted. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Elias reached out, slowly. Adrian met him halfway, hands intertwined. Choice made, not because it was safe, but because walking away felt worse. Above them, the palace lights glowed gold against the dark sky. Across the ocean, political currents shifted unseen. And somewhere, someone was watching. The game had begun, and love, in its most forbidden form, was now leverage. Part 3, a photograph as a weapon. The second photograph was clearer. Not perfect, but clearer. Close enough to recognize posture. Close enough to confirm proximity. Close enough to destroy careers, governments, legacies. President Elias Navarro stared at the encrypted file projected on the secure screen inside his private diplomatic suite. Across the image, moonlight, ivy, stone, and Adrian's hand at his waist. The message beneath it was different this time. Withdraw the defense amendment from the treaty, or this goes public. Elias didn't react immediately. He had spent years in politics mastering the art of stillness under pressure. But inside, something cold coiled around his ribs. This was no random leak. This was strategic. Across the palace compound, Crown Prince Adrien Laurent received the same photograph, but with a different demand. Support the agricultural trade concession publicly tomorrow, or the monarchy will face scandal. 2 messages, 2 demands, opposite directions. Someone wasn't just threatening them. Someone was playing them against each other. They met in a place no one would think to monitor, the royal archives beneath the West Wing. Dusty shelves, ancient scrolls, history preserved in silence. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Adrian arrived first this time. Elias followed minutes later, coat collar raised, security detail misdirected with surgical precision. Adrian handed him his device without a word. Elias showed his in return. They stood shoulder to shoulder, reading both messages in silence. They want us divided, Elias said finally. Yes, they're assuming we'll protect our positions first. Adrian's jaw tightened. Wouldn't you? Elias didn't answer immediately. As president, his first duty was to the people who elected him. Transparency, stability, integrity. As a man, his gaze shifted toward Adrian. I should, Elias admitted. Adrian's expression flickered, not hurt, but understanding. And yet I don't want to. Silence, heavy, honest. Adrian moved to the long wooden table at the center of the archive room. This isn't about policy, he said. If it were, they would pressure our advisors. This is leverage. They know exposure would destabilize both governments, Elias added. Yes, and potentially spark a constitutional crisis. Yes, Elias exhaled slowly. So the question becomes, do we sacrifice each other, Adrian finished, or do we risk everything? Their eyes met. There it was again, not just attraction, trust, which was far more dangerous. Meanwhile, in a shadowed office within the palace administrative wing, Lord Harrington sat across from a communications director from Astera's visiting delegation. They did not look like conspirators. They looked like professionals discussing strategy. The prince has grown, distracted, Harrington said calmly. And the president has shown unusual flexibility in negotiations, the director replied. Harrington folded his hands. If certain information were to surface, it would destabilize both leaders. The director's lips curved faintly. Or reshape them. Harrington's gaze sharpened. The monarchy cannot appear compromised. And the presidency cannot appear manipulated. They understood each other perfectly. This was not personal. It was political preservation. Back in the archives, Adrian leaned against the table. If we comply with the demands, he said, we confirm we're vulnerable. And if we refuse, they release the images. Elias considered the implications. In Astera, the opposition party would accuse him of moral corruption, of secret dealings with the monarchy. His approval ratings could plummet overnight. A vote of no confidence wasn't impossible. In Valoria, Adrian's father, King Henri, would interpret the relationship as both scandal and betrayal. A crown prince involved romantically with a foreign head of state. It would ignite outrage among traditionalists. And yet, what if we control the narrative? Elias said quietly. Adrian looked up, meaning, we don't wait for them to expose us. The air shifted. You're suggesting we announce it ourselves. I'm suggesting, Elias said carefully, that secrets are weapons only when they're hidden. Adrian studied him. You would risk your presidency. You would risk your crown. The questions hung between them. Adrian stepped closer. If this destroys you, it won't, Elias said firmly. It will challenge me. There's a difference. Adrian's voice softened. You're remarkably calm about potentially becoming the first president impeached for kissing a prince. Elias's lips twitched despite the tension. I've survived worse headlines. Adrian didn't smile. This isn't a headline. It's history. Yes, Elias agreed quietly. It is. The following day, tension bled into every public appearance. At the press conference, reporters asked sharper questions. Mr. President, are there disagreements over defense provisions? Your Highness, has the monarchy influenced agricultural negotiations? Both answered with practiced precision. Neither faltered, but beneath the polished words, a decision was forming. That evening, Elias requested a private audience with his senior advisory council via a secure video link. I need a hypothetical assessment, he began. The advisors exchanged wary glances. Hypothetically, Elias continued, if compromising personal information about me were released, information implying a close relationship with a foreign royal, what would the fallout be? Silence exploded across the line. That would depend on context, one advisor said carefully. Assume it's genuine. More silence. It would cause immediate media frenzy, another replied. Opposition leaders would demand investigation. But public reaction may not be uniformly negative. Elias leaned forward. Explain. You're popular. Younger voters are socially progressive. An honest relationship, even unconventional, might humanize you. And older voters, divided. Elias nodded slowly. So not guaranteed collapse. No, Mr. President. After the call ended, Elias sat alone in the dim room. He wasn't afraid of scandal. He was afraid of harming Adrian. Across the palace, Adrian faced his father in the king's private study. King Henri was a formidable man, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, tradition carved into bone. I've received troubling whispers, the king said without preamble. Adrian stood tall. What kind of whispers? About you, and the president. Adrian's pulse remained steady through years of royal training. Diplomatic proximity invites speculation. The king's gaze narrowed. Speculation becomes danger when it threatens the throne. Adrian met his father's eyes. The throne is not so fragile. Do not test that assumption. Silence. The king's voice lowered. You will remember your duty. Adrian bowed slightly. I always do. But as he left the study, the weight of that duty felt suffocating. Midnight. East Garden Pavilion. No messages exchanged. No plans made. They both came anyway. Elias spoke first. I'm not withdrawing the amendment. Adrian nodded. I'm not endorsing the concession. Silence. That means they release it, Elias said. Yes. Elias stepped closer. If they do, I won't deny it, Adrian said. Elias froze. You would admit it? Yes. Adrian's voice was steady. I am done living as an emblem. If I choose you, I will not pretend otherwise. Elias's breath caught. You understand what that means? Yes. You could lose the throne. And you could lose the presidency. A beat. Adrian's gaze softened. I would rather lose power than lose myself. The words hit harder than any threat. Elias closed the distance between them. This kiss wasn't stolen. It wasn't rushed. It was deliberate. A decision sealed in silence. Above them, unseen, a camera lens adjusted focus. And somewhere, a file began uploading. By morning, the photograph was trending worldwide. Breaking. Alleged intimate images of Crown Prince and President surface. News anchors debated legitimacy. Social media erupted. Political analysts dissected every pixel. And in two separate buildings, two leaders prepared to face the storm. Not as prince and president, but as men who had chosen each other, knowing the cost. Part 4. When the world looks back. The world did not whisper. It roared. By sunrise, every major international network was broadcasting the photograph. Analysts circled silhouettes in red. Commentators slowed footage, enhanced contrast, debated angles and authenticity. The image was no longer grainy in the public mind. It was narrative. It was scandal. It was history unfolding in real time. Is this a diplomatic affair? Is the monarchy compromised? Has the president violated ethical boundaries? Has. No one asked why. In Valoria, palace gates were lined with press vans before dawn. Inside, Crown Prince Adrien Laurent stood alone in his dressing chamber while aides hovered outside awaiting instruction. He had slept 3 hours. He did not look tired. Royal training had carved composure into him long before love complicated it. His phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications, international leaders requesting clarification, Political advisors urging denial, family members demanding explanation. A knock sounded. Enter. King Henri stepped inside. No entourage, no witnesses, just father and son. The king held a tablet in his hand. You wish to explain, he said evenly. Adrian did not bow this time. Yes. The word did not shake. The king set the tablet on the table between them. The photograph glowed on the screen. Is it genuine? Yes. Silence filled the room like smoke. King Henry's jaw tightened. You understand what this implies? Yes. You have entangled the crown with a foreign executive power. I have formed a relationship, Adrian corrected quietly. The king's gaze sharpened. With a president whose political survival depends on public perception. And mine does not, Adrian asked softly. That landed. For the first time, something flickered in the king's expression, not anger. Fear. You risk destabilizing centuries of tradition. Adrian met his father's eyes. Perhaps tradition is strong enough to survive truth. The king looked at him for a long moment. You intend to admit it publicly? Yes. A long pause. You are my heir, the king said finally. Not because you are perfect, but because you are unbreakable. Adrian felt the weight of that. If you do this, the king continued, you will do it with dignity. Not defiance. Adrian inclined his head. I understand. It was not approval, but it was not exile. Across the ocean in Astera, President Elias Navarro stood behind the podium in the executive briefing room. The press corps was packed shoulder to shoulder. Lights burned hot, microphones angled forward, every camera trained on him. He had declined prepared statements. He had written his own. The room quieted. Elias adjusted the microphone. I am aware of the images circulating this morning. A wave of murmurs. He didn't wait for them to settle. They are authentic. The room exploded with sound. Questions fired like bullets. Mr. President, are you confirming a relationship with Crown Prince Adrien Laurent? Yes. Flashbulbs burst. Does this compromise national security? No. Did diplomatic negotiations influence this relationship? No. His voice did not waver. I will not apologize for caring about someone. My duty to this country remains unchanged. A reporter shouted from the back. Will you resign? Elias's gaze sharpened. No. The word was calm, certain, unmovable. I was elected to serve, not to conform to private expectations of who I'm allowed to love. Silence followed that, heavy, charged. He stepped away from the podium before another question could be thrown. The world now had its confirmation. Valoria's announcement came hours later. Crown Prince Adrien stood before the royal seal in the Grand Hall. His uniform was formal, white and gold, medals aligned perfectly. He did not hold notes. My personal life has become a matter of public discussion, he began. His voice carried effortlessly through the hall. The images shared a reel. A ripple through the assembled press. I will not characterize my relationship as a weakness. He paused deliberately. Nor will I allow it to be weaponized against the stability of this kingdom. A journalist called out, does His Majesty support this relationship? Adrien did not look away from the cameras. My father supports the strength of this crown. Careful, strategic, true enough. Another question, will this affect succession? Adrien's gaze cooled slightly. The monarchy does not fracture because its heir is human. And that was the final word. Markets dipped, then stabilized. Opposition leaders in Astera called for investigation. Then softened when public opinion began trending unexpectedly in Elias's favor. Social media fractured along generational lines. Younger citizens flooded feeds with support. Older traditionalists expressed outrage. In Valoria, royal loyalists were divided, but the absence of visible anger from King Henri muted rebellion. The blackmailers had expected collapse. Instead, they got resilience. That night, for the first time since the photographs were released, Adrien and Elias met openly. Not hidden in archives, not beneath ivy, but in a secured diplomatic residence approved by both governments. Official, sanctioned, observed from a distance. When the door closed behind them, silence fell. Elias removed his jacket slowly. You realize, he said, voice low, we just altered two political systems. Adrien stepped closer. Yes, and we might have strengthened them instead of breaking them. Yes. A faint, incredulous laugh escaped Elias. That was not the expected outcome. Adrien's lips curved softly. Perhaps they underestimated how tired the world is of pretending. Elias studied him. You were remarkable today. You were reckless, Adrien replied gently. Is that your royal assessment? It's my personal one. They stood inches apart. No cameras now, no speeches, just breath shared in quiet. Are you afraid? Elias asked. Yes, Adrien admitted. Of what? Losing you to politics. Elias's expression softened. I didn't confirm this relationship to walk away from it. Adrian's fingers brushed Elias's wrist. Deliberate, visible, unhidden. You could still face impeachment. And you could still face succession complications. Yes. Elias leaned closer. Would you undo it? Adrian didn't hesitate. No. The kiss that followed wasn't desperate. It was grounding. Not rebellion, but affirmation. Elsewhere, in a dimly lit office within Valoria's administrative wing, Lord Harrington stared at the televised statements in disbelief. They were supposed to deny it, he muttered. His counterpart in Astera's delegation frowned. They've turned scandal into narrative control. Harrington's fingers tightened around the armrest. This is not over. No, it wasn't, because love might have survived exposure. But power did not forgive disruption. And somewhere in the machinery of government, those who preferred the old order were recalculating. Later that night, Adrian stood at a window overlooking the city. Elias joined him. Below, crowds had gathered, not protesting. Celebrating. Candles. Flags. Signs reading, "Lead with truth. Love is not treason." Adrian exhaled slowly. They didn't burn the palace, he said softly. Elias smiled faintly. Give it time. Adrian turned toward him. You're impossible, and you're still a prince. They stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the lights flicker below. For the first time since the photograph surfaced, the fear had lessened. Not gone, but transformed into something steadier. Choice. They had stepped into the light together. Now they would learn whether love could withstand what followed. Because exposure was only the first battle. Power never conceded quietly. Part 5. The cost of standing together. The celebration did not last long. It never does. By the end of the week, support rallies were replaced with policy scrutiny. Analysts stopped debating romance and started dissecting implications. Parliament members in Valoria requested constitutional clarification. Astera's opposition party drafted a formal ethics inquiry. Love had survived exposure. Now it had to survive consequence. In Astera's Capitol building, President Elias Navarro sat at the head of a long oak table while senior cabinet members argued in controlled tones. This opens us to foreign influence accusations, the Secretary of Defense said bluntly. There is no evidence of policy compromise, Elias replied. There doesn't have to be, another advisor countered. Perception alone destabilizes confidence. Elias leaned back in his chair. So the solution is what? Public repentance. No one answered, because that was exactly what some of them wanted. The Attorney General cleared her throat carefully. There is talk of forming a bipartisan oversight committee. It would investigate whether your personal relationship influenced treaty negotiations. Elias's gaze hardened. Did it? No, she said quickly. Then let them investigate. The room fell silent. You're willing to risk formal inquiry? She asked. I'm willing to stand by the truth. But truth, Elias knew, was rarely the whole battle. Politics was endurance. Across the ocean, in the marble halls of Valoria's parliament, conservative lords whispered of abdication clauses and succession contingency plans. Crown Prince Adrien Laurent walked through the corridor alone, the echo of his polished shoes the only sound that did not pretend civility. He entered the chamber mid-session. Voices quieted instantly. One senior lord stood. Your Highness, may we request clarification regarding the stability of the royal lineage? There it was, carefully phrased, sharpened underneath. Adrian stood tall. The stability of the monarchy rests in its service to the people, he said evenly. Not in the personal life of its heir. Another lord rose. Does your Highness intend to produce a direct successor? The implication hung in the air like smoke. Adrian did not flinch. The future of succession will be addressed in due course. A murmur rippled through the chamber. He did not elaborate. He did not defend. He simply turned and left, posture unshaken. But the questions followed him. That night, Adrian and Elias met in Astera. Official visit. Transparent itinerary. No secrecy now. Still, when the door to Elias's private residence closed, the air shifted. Elias poured 2 glasses of water instead of wine. We need clear heads, he said quietly. Adrian accepted the glass. They're pressuring you. Yes. And investigating. Yes. Adrian stepped closer. Do you regret it? Elias looked at him fully. No, even if they impeach you. Elias exhaled slowly. They won't. You sound certain. I'm not, Elias admitted. But I won't live as if I've done something shameful. Adrian's expression softened. You shouldn't have to. Elias gave a small, tired smile. Neither should you. They sat together on the edge of the couch. No urgency. No stolen kisses. Just presence. After a long silence, Adrian spoke again. They're questioning succession. Elias's jaw tightened. Of course they are. They want assurance that the royal line remains traditional. Elias's voice dropped. And will it? Adrian hesitated. Not from doubt, but from complexity. The crown requires continuity, but continuity does not require conformity. Elias studied him. You're thinking of reform. Yes. That would take years. I know. Silence again. Then Elias asked quietly, if it comes down to it, the crown or me, what would you choose? The question was not accusatory. It was honest. Adrian did not answer immediately. He stepped forward instead, resting his forehead lightly against Elias's. I would choose a future where I don't have to give up either. That's not how power works, Elias murmured. No, Adrian agreed, but perhaps that's how it should. The Oversight Committee in Astera was officially announced 3 days later. Televised, framed as procedural, laced with skepticism, opposition leaders called it a necessary safeguard. Elias called it democratic transparency. Privately, his approval ratings dipped, then stabilized, then, unexpectedly, began to rise again among younger demographics. He wasn't collapsing, but the pressure was relentless. Meanwhile, in Valoria, a senior royal advisor approached King Henri privately. Your Majesty, the advisor said carefully, public support for the prince remains steady. But certain aristocratic families are unsettled. King Henri stared out the palace window. They have always been unsettled by change. Should we encourage distance between His Highness and the President? The king did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked, does the prince appear weak? No. Then we do not move against strength. The advisor bowed. The monarchy would not fracture from within. Not yet. Late one evening, as Elias prepared briefing documents for the inquiry, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Instead, he answered. A distorted voice spoke. You handled exposure well. Elias didn't respond. But power doesn't like unpredictability. What do you want? Elias asked calmly. You to remember who truly governs outcomes. The line went dead. Elias stared at the phone. This wasn't opposition theatrics. This was something deeper. Institutional resistance. Entrenched interests. People who thrived in the shadows of stability. And he had disrupted that balance. Adrian received a similar message hours later. History rewards obedience, not romance. He deleted it without reply. Then he booked a flight. Not for diplomacy. For Elias. They met on a rooftop overlooking Astera's skyline. No press. No ceremony. Just wind and city lights. They're escalating, Elias said. Yes. They're not just investigating. They're threatening. Adrian stepped closer. Let them. Elias looked at him sharply. This isn't a fairy tale. I know. They could dismantle years of your preparation for the throne. And they could dismantle your presidency. Silence. Then Adrian said quietly, do you trust me? Elias didn't hesitate. Yes. Then trust that I will not let them isolate you. Elias studied him. You sound like you're preparing for war. Adrian's expression turned resolute. Politics is war. We've simply chosen to fight openly. Elias almost laughed. You're terrifying when you're determined. Adrian's lips curved faintly. You haven't seen determined yet. They stood there, the wind whipping around them, the weight of nations pressing on their shoulders. For the first time since the scandal broke, something shifted again. Not fear, not defiance, strategy. They were done reacting. Now they would act. Because love alone was not enough. Not in palaces, not in capitals. If they wanted a future together, they would have to reshape the systems trying to contain them. And that meant sacrifice. Real sacrifice. The kind that changes the course of history. Part 6. The Line You Cannot Cross. The oversight hearings began on a Monday. Televised, structured, polite, merciless. President Elias Navarro sat beneath the bright chamber lights while a bipartisan committee questioned him with careful precision. Mr. President, when did your relationship with Crown Prince Adrien Laurent begin? During formal diplomatic engagement, before or after treaty discussions, after initial negotiations, and you maintain there was no policy influence? Yes. His voice did not waver. But the repetition was exhausting. Behind the scenes, commentators dissected every micro-expression. Political rivals clipped seconds of footage for partisan narratives. Words like conflict of interest and constitutional ethics echoed through headlines. Elias answered every question directly. He refused legal deflection. Transparency was his weapon. And yet, transparency did not silence power. Across the ocean, Adrian watched the hearings alone in his private study. He stood rather than sat, hands clasped behind his back. Every time Elias was pressed about loyalty, something tightened in Adrian's chest. Not doubt, rage. This wasn't about ethics. It was about control. About punishing deviation, a knock interrupted his thoughts. Enter. King Henri stepped in without ceremony. The two men stood facing the screen together as a senator asked, "Mr. President, would you choose your relationship over national interest?" Elias answered without hesitation, "I do not believe love and national interest are mutually exclusive." The king muted the broadcast. "You see what this becomes," he said quietly. "Yes, it becomes a referendum on leadership itself." Adrian's jaw hardened. "Then let them see leadership." The king studied his son carefully. "You are prepared to endure this?" "Yes, and if endurance is not enough." Adrian finally turned toward him. "Then I will change what must be changed." The king's eyes sharpened slightly. "You speak like a sovereign already." Adrian did not respond. 3 days into the hearings, the escalation came. A senior opposition figure publicly proposed a temporary transfer of executive authority until the inquiry concludes. It wasn't impeachment, not yet, but it was a warning shot. Markets dipped again. Political donors hesitated. Advisors whispered contingency plans. That night, Elias stood alone in his office long after staff had left. The city lights reflected in the glass behind him. He wasn't afraid of losing power. He was afraid of becoming the reason his country fractured. His secure line buzzed. "Adrian." He answered immediately. "You look tired," Adrian said softly through the encrypted video call. "I am." "Are they pushing harder?" "Yes." A pause. Then Elias said the words he had been holding back. "If this continues, I may need to step aside temporarily." Silence. Adrian's expression didn't change, but something colder settled behind his eyes. "On whose advice?" "My cabinet believes it would de-escalate tensions." "Would it?" Elias hesitated. "It would show institutional respect." "And reward intimidation," Adrian replied calmly. Elias exhaled. "You don't understand the mechanics of a republic. And you underestimate the mechanics of a crown." Their gazes locked through the screen. Adrian's voice lowered. "If you step down now, they will define the narrative. They will not return power easily." Elias leaned forward slightly. "If I refuse, they may attempt forced removal. Then you fight." Elias gave a tired half-smile. "You make it sound simple." "It isn't." Adrian's tone softened. "But stepping back won't protect us. It will only prove them right." Elias fell silent. He knew Adrian wasn't wrong. But leadership required calculation beyond personal pride. "If my staying harms the country." "It won't," Adrian interrupted firmly. "You cannot carry this alone." "I don't intend to." Adrian's voice shifted. "Which is why I'm coming to Astera." Elias blinked. "Officially?" "Yes." "For what purpose?" Adrian's gaze sharpened. "To remind them that I am not a liability." The announcement stunned both nations. Crown Prince Adrien Laurent would address Astera's legislative assembly in a joint diplomatic session. It was unprecedented, a royal heir speaking before a foreign republic's elected body during a presidential ethics inquiry. Political commentators lost composure. This is strategic escalation. This could backfire. This is either brilliance or disaster. Probably both. The chamber was packed beyond capacity. President Elias sat to the side, not at the center. Deliberate symbolism. Adrian entered in formal attire, not ceremonial regalia. Respect, not dominance. When he reached the podium, the room was silent. He did not smile. He did not posture. He spoke. "I stand before you not as a monarch." A ripple through the room. "I stand before you as a partner in alliance, and as a man who respects democratic institutions." His voice carried clearly. "I have heard concerns that my relationship with President Navarro compromises governance." He paused deliberately. "I would ask you this, does integrity weaken a leader?" No one answered. "Does honesty destabilize democracy?" Silence. "Or does fear?" That landed. He continued. "I have not asked your president to alter policy for me. I have not influenced treaty negotiations beyond public record." He looked across the chamber. "If you believe love is leverage, then you misunderstand both." The word hung heavy. "Your president has not faltered in his duty." Adrian's voice steadied further. "And neither will I." The speech lasted 12 minutes. It reshaped the room, not because it was dramatic, but because it was controlled, confident, unapologetic. When Adrian stepped away from the podium, applause began slowly. Then grew, not unanimous, but undeniable. That night, Elias found Adrian standing alone in the quiet wing of the residence. "You just addressed my legislature like a seasoned diplomat," Elias said. Adrian turned slightly. "I am a diplomat." Elias approached him. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Elias searched his face. "You risked your own credibility." Adrian's voice softened. "I will not let them frame you as compromised." Silence settled between them. Then Elias spoke quietly. "They will still try. I know. They may attempt emergency powers. Then we prepare. Elias studied him. You've crossed a line. Yes. Why? Adrian stepped closer. Because they are trying to separate us through institutional pressure. And I refuse to be separated. The words were not romantic. They were resolute. Elias reached for him slowly. This may still cost us everything. Adrian's hand slid into his. Then let it cost us together. The following morning, political momentum shifted. Public approval for Elias rose after Adrian's address. The Oversight Committee softened its tone. Talk of temporary authority transfer faded. Not gone, but weakened. However, in the shadows of both governments, those who preferred control were recalibrating. Because if direct exposure had failed, and intimidation had failed, then something harsher might be required. Power did not surrender easily, and someone had begun drafting a contingency that neither crown nor presidency could easily withstand. Part 7, The Scandal They Can't Bury. The photo went viral at 2:17 a.m. Grainy, taken from a distance, slightly blurred, but unmistakable. Kang Ji-hyun, the untouchable CEO, sitting on the wooden steps of a countryside diner. Laughing, not the polite business smile he wore in magazines. Not the cold expression from press conferences. This was different, head tilted back, eyes soft, and next to him, close enough that their shoulders touched. Seo-hyun, unknown, ordinary. The caption read, "Missing CEO found living with mysterious man in rural village." Within an hour, every major portal site picked it up. By morning, the entire country knew. Hyun found out when a delivery boy walked into the diner grinning like he'd discovered treasure. "Hung, you're famous." Hyun blinked. "I sell noodles." The kid shoved a phone in his face. Hyun saw the photo. His stomach dropped. Min came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands. "What happened?" Hyun turned the screen toward him. Min went very still. "No panic. Just calculation. They moved faster than I expected," he murmured. By noon, reporters doubled. By evening, they tripled. Microphones stretched over each other like a battlefield. "Chairman Kang, is this a romantic relationship? Are you coming out? Is this why you rejected the merger marriage? Is the other man being financially supported by you?" That one made Min step forward sharply. "Do not insult him," he said. The temperature shifted, because his voice held something dangerous. Not anger, protection. Inside, Hyun leaned against the counter, breathing hard. "I didn't sign up for this," he said quietly. Min walked toward him. "I know. People are calling the diner. Strangers. Some cheering. Some." He stopped. "Some not." Min's jaw tightened. "This is my fault." "No," Hyun said immediately. "It's the world's fault for being obsessed with powerful men not loving the way they expect." Min almost smiled. Even now, Hyun still found warmth. Another headline dropped. JK Holdings stock drops amid CEO relationship controversy. Seo-hyun called. "This is spiraling," he said. "Investors are panicking." "Over who I care about?" Min asked. "Over unpredictability." Min looked at Hyun through the kitchen doorway. He remembered his old philosophy. Emotions are liabilities. And here he was, choosing one, openly. "Issue a statement," Min said. "Deny it?" Seo-hyun asked. Min's answer came without hesitation. "No." The press conference was set up outside the diner because the media refused to leave. Cameras lined up, lights too bright. Hyun stood just inside the doorway, unseen. Watching. Min stepped forward. Perfect posture. Calm face. The CEO had fully returned. But his eyes were different now. "I will answer one question," he said. "Is the man inside your romantic partner?" The crowd held its breath. Min didn't look back. "Yes," he said. The word exploded. Gasps. Shouting. Flashes. But Min continued. "My personal life does not affect my ability to lead. JK Holdings' instability comes from internal resistance to change, not from who I care about." Reporters shouted more questions. Min raised a hand. "For years, I built systems without asking who they hurt," he said. "That ends now." Silence fell. Because this wasn't damage control. This was revolution. Inside, Hyun's eyes burned. He didn't cry, but something inside him shook. Min walked back in. The door closed. The noise muffled. They stood face to face. "You didn't have to do that," Hyun said. "Yes," Min replied. "I did." A pause. "They'll attack you harder now." "I know." "Why?" Min's voice softened. "Because for the first time in my life, I'm not choosing what's safe." He stepped closer. "I'm choosing you." The words landed quietly, but they were louder than any headline. That night, support messages flooded in. So did hate. The diner phone wouldn't stop ringing. But something else happened too. JK Holdings employees began posting online. Stories of harsh policies, long hours, cold leadership, and one sentence appeared again and again. Maybe this new version of him is what the company needed. In his old office in Seoul, a board member threw a newspaper down. He's turning public sympathy into power, he snapped. Another spoke coldly. Then we don't attack the CEO. A pause. We attack the man he loves. Back in Wayang, Haenul locked the diner doors. He didn't know yet. The scandal wasn't the storm. It was the warning. Because the empire had stopped aiming at Min and set its sights on him. Part 8. The Crown Rewritten. The suspension announcement was delivered at 9 a.m. President Elias Navarro stood behind the national seal, expression steady, voice measured. In light of the recent security incidents, I am authorizing a temporary suspension of the defense implementation clause within the Valoria-Astara Treaty pending full investigation. He did not look defensive. He did not look apologetic. He looked presidential. This decision is precautionary. It is not punitive. The words were chosen carefully. I remain committed to our alliance. But my foremost duty is the safety of this republic. He did not mention Adrian's name. He did not need to. By noon, headlines framed it as distance. President pulls back from royal alliance. Security fears force policy retreat. Political analysts speculated about fractures in the relationship. Opposition leaders claimed partial victory. But those who looked closely saw something else. Elias had suspended implementation, not the alliance. He had drawn a line without burning the bridge. Still, distance is distance, and it weighs heavily. In Valoria, Adrian watched the announcement alone in the king's council chamber. When the broadcast ended, silence lingered. King Henri spoke first. He chose his country. Yes, Adrian said quietly. And you? Adrian did not hesitate. I would have done the same. The king studied him. Does it anger you? No, it didn't. It hurt, but it didn't anger him. Good, the king said softly. Because what you do next matters more. Adrian turned toward him. I intend to address Parliament. The king's brow lifted slightly. Regarding the monarchy's constitutional structure, that earned full attention. You intend reform? Yes. Silence settled thick in the chamber. Reform was not a casual word in Valoria. It meant shifts in centuries-old frameworks. It meant redistribution of authority. It meant risk. The king's voice lowered. Explain. Adrian stepped forward. If the monarchy's legitimacy can be questioned because of who I love, then its legitimacy is too fragile. The king said nothing. Adrian continued. I propose amending succession protocols to remove implicit marital expectations tied to political advantage. The words were radical in their simplicity. Marriage in Valoria had always been statecraft. An heir's partner was strategic alliance, bloodline reinforcement, international diplomacy embodied. Adrian was suggesting separation of crown and conjugal politics. The king's gaze hardened slightly. You would dismantle tradition. I would strengthen it. How? By proving it does not rely on personal conformity. Silence stretched. Finally, the king asked. And if Parliament refuses? Adrian's voice steadied. Then they reveal that their loyalty is to control, not crown. Across the ocean, Elias felt the distance more sharply than he expected. Official communications continued. Diplomatic channels remained active, but their private conversations were shorter. More measured, not colder, just restrained. They both knew why. The world was watching for cracks. One evening, as Elias reviewed intelligence updates on the sabotage investigation, his phone vibrated. Adrian, he answered immediately. You've been quiet, Elias said softly. I've been planning. That caught his attention. For what? Reform. Elias leaned back in his chair. You're serious? Yes. You realize that could destabilize internal royal factions? Yes. Why now? Adrian's voice lowered. Because distance made something clear. What? That we cannot build a future on borrowed structures. Elias closed his eyes briefly. You're rewriting a monarchy because of us. No, Adrian corrected gently. Because of what this exposed. Silence. Then Elias asked the question. That mattered. If reform fails, then I will consider abdication. The word hit like impact. You would give up the throne. If the crown demands I choose between duty and truth, then it is not a crown worth inheriting. Elias stood slowly. Adrian, I don't say it lightly. You've prepared your entire life. Yes, and you would walk away, if necessary. Silence filled the line. Elias's voice softened. I never wanted to cost you that. You didn't. Adrian's tone was steady. This is my decision. The sabotage investigation progressed quietly. Intelligence agencies in both nations collaborated discreetly. Evidence mounted linking the attacks to a private defense conglomerate seeking to provoke treaty collapse and restore lucrative isolationist contracts. Arrests were being prepared, but timing was delicate. Too early, and it looked like deflection. Too late, and instability festered. Both leaders waited, strategically, patiently. Valoria's parliament convened for Adrian's reform proposal. The chamber was filled beyond capacity. Traditionalists bristled. Progressives watched carefully. Foreign press lined the upper gallery. Adrian stood at the central podium. He wore no ceremonial sash. Only a simple tailored suit. Intentional. My proposal, he began calmly, is not about personal indulgence. Murmurs quieted. It is about constitutional clarity. He outlined the amendment. Succession based solely on merit and constitutional designation, not marital status. Removal of expectation that royal marriage serve geopolitical strategy. Clear separation between sovereign authority and personal union. Gasps. Whispers. One senior lord rose immediately. This is unprecedented. Yes, Adrian agreed calmly. It risks weakening alliances forged through matrimony. Or strengthens alliances forged through policy. The chamber stirred. Another voice called out, is this about the president? Adrian did not flinch. This is about ensuring that no heir is ever forced to choose between crown and conscience. Silence. It wasn't thunderous approval, but it wasn't rejection either. Debate would take weeks, possibly months, but the seed had been planted. That night, Adrian stood alone on the palace balcony. The same balcony where this had all begun. His phone buzzed. A secure message from Elias. They've issued arrest warrants. Adrian's breath slowed. Confirmed. Yes. Coordinated arrests across both countries. The sabotage architects were being dismantled. Quietly, efficiently, Adrian typed back. Then distance was necessary. A pause. Then, it was. Silence lingered in the message thread. Then Elias added, it doesn't mean I liked it. Adrian smiled faintly at the screen. Neither did I. A final message appeared. When this settles, we stop surviving. We start building. Adrian's reply was immediate. Agreed. Days later, public announcements revealed the sabotage network. Corporate executives arrested. Financial trails exposed. Political manipulation confirmed. Both governments condemned the acts jointly. Standing side by side at an international press briefing, Adrian and Elias addressed the world again. This time, not defensive. Not reactive. Resolute. The attacks were not acts of ideology, Elias said. They were acts of greed. Adrian followed. And greed will not dictate the future of our nations. Their hands did not touch. But their alignment was unmistakable. The treaty suspension remained temporary. Review underway. Trust rebuilding. Distance narrowing. And inside Valoria's parliament, reform debates continued, slowly reshaping a monarchy that had once seemed immovable. Because Adrian had crossed a line. Not away from duty, but toward redefining it. That night, for the first time since the crisis, Adrian boarded a private flight to Astera without secrecy or tension. Not as defiance, not as emergency, but as continuation. The distance had tested them. It had not broken them. Now came the final test. Could they build something permanent within systems that were never designed to allow it? Part 9, The Choice That Breaks a Crown. The first time they met after the leak, it wasn't in a palace corridor or behind a locked office door. It was in a war room. Screens covered the walls, news anchors debating constitutional crisis, opposition leaders demanding investigation, foreign correspondents speculating about monarchical instability. The headline rotated endlessly. Crown Prince and President. Secret affair exposed. Prince Seo-hyun stood at the head of the table, posture flawless, expression carved from marble. He wore a navy suit instead of ceremonial attire. No insignia, no medals, just a man in control. President Kang Ji-won entered from the side door, security detail peeling away as the door shut behind him. For a moment, the room felt too small, too full, too dangerous. Their eyes met, everything else disappeared, but this wasn't a stolen hallway glance or a midnight touch. It was a battlefield. The Prime Minister cleared his throat. Your Highness, Mr. President. Ji-won's jaw tightened slightly at the formal address. Seo-hyun didn't move. We need a coordinated statement, the Prime Minister continued. Denying outright is risky. The photos are suggestive but not explicit. We can argue political fabrication. Fabrication, Ji-won repeated quietly. Every head turned. The Prime Minister hesitated. Yes, sir. Ji-won's gaze didn't leave Seo-hyun. They're not fabricated. A pulse of shock rippled across the room. Seo-hyun's fingers curled slightly against the table, the only sign of emotion. You're suggesting, the Prime Minister said carefully, that we admit to an inappropriate relationship between the head of state and the heir to the throne. I'm suggesting, Ji-won replied evenly, that we don't lie. Silence thickened like smoke. Seo-hyun finally spoke. His voice was calm, measured, royal. The Constitution prohibits political partisanship from the crown, he said. It does not prohibit personal affection. Public perception, someone began, is already fractured, Seo-hyun interrupted. Lying will fracture it further. Ji-won's eyes flickered toward him, gratitude and something deeper. Something terrified. The meeting dissolved into arguments. Strategy proposals, legal interpretations, crisis management teams. But beneath the noise, a single truth pulsed. They had been discovered, and now they had to choose. That night, they met where it had all begun. The private garden. The roses were in bloom again. Ji-won arrived first. No aides, no cameras, just the weight of the nation on his shoulders. Seo-hyun appeared moments later, walking the stone path like a ghost between worlds. For the first time since the scandal broke, they were alone. You shouldn't have said that, Seo-hyun murmured. Ji-won exhaled softly. I won't deny loving you. The word hung in the air. Loving. Seo-hyun closed the distance between them. If you admit it publicly, Seo-hyun said quietly, Parliament will demand inquiry. The monarchy's neutrality will be questioned. There will be calls to reduce royal authority. Ji-won nodded. And if we deny it, you remain untouchable, Seo-hyun answered. I become a reckless prince misled by ambition. The narrative will shift. Ji-won's chest tightened. They'll paint you as manipulative. Seo-hyun's expression didn't change. They already do. Wind rustled the roses. Ji-won stepped closer. Tell me the truth. Seo-hyun's composure flickered. Truth, he repeated softly. Yes. The prince's eyes darkened, not with anger. With something far more dangerous. If I choose you publicly, Seo-hyun said, I risk destabilizing the crown. If I choose the crown publicly, I lose you. Ji-won swallowed. Seo-hyun took another step forward until only inches separated them. You once asked me what I wanted. Seo-hyun said. Ji-won nodded. Seo-hyun's voice dropped. I want to stop choosing between duty and love. Ji-won's breath caught. I am tired, Seo-hyun continued, of being the embodiment of restraint. Of being carved into symbol in stone. His hand lifted, hesitated, then gently cupped Ji-won's jaw. I want, he whispered, to be human. Ji-won closed his eyes. You are, he breathed. No, Seo-hyun replied softly. Not publicly. A distant bell chimed the hour. Ji-won opened his eyes. Then let's change that. Seo-hyun's fingers tightened slightly. You're prepared, Seo-hyun asked carefully, for the consequences. Ji-won's gaze steadied. I have faced coups, impeachment threats, economic collapse, he said. I will not be afraid of loving someone. Seo-hyun studied him for a long moment. You could lose re-election. I could. You could fracture your party. I might. You could lose everything. Ji-won smiled faintly. I've already decided what matters. Silence. Then Seo-hyun leaned forward and pressed his forehead against Ji-won's. A gesture too intimate for a camera. Too honest for politics. Then we do this together, Seo-hyun whispered. Ji-won nodded. Together. The announcement was scheduled for 3 days later. A joint press conference. Unprecedented. The world waited. Speculation exploded. Markets trembled. Conservative factions protested. Progressive activists demanded transparency. The palace released a brief statement. The crown prince will address the nation alongside the president regarding recent events. The phrasing alone sent shockwaves. Inside the palace, preparations were surgical. Inside the presidential residence, advisors argued until sunrise. Sir, one aide insisted, public approval is already slipping. A confirmation could. Ji-won raised a hand. No more calculations. He signed the final speech draft himself. Across the city, Seo-hyun dismissed half his communications team. This must not sound rehearsed, he said. Your Highness, every word matters. Yes, Seo-hyun replied calmly. That's why they must be mine. The day arrived. They stood side by side behind twin podiums. Flags framed them, royal crest and national emblem. Cameras flashed like lightning. The room buzzed with restrained chaos. Ji-won spoke first. He didn't look at his notes. My fellow citizens, he began, voice steady, recent reports have raised questions about my relationship with His Royal Highness, Crown Prince Seo-hyun. A breathless silence. I will not insult you with denial, Ji-won continued. Yes, we share a personal relationship. The words detonated. Gasps, shutter clicks, whispered exclamations. Ji-won didn't flinch. My duty as president remains unchanged. My commitment to this nation remains absolute. Loving someone does not diminish my capacity to serve. He turned slightly. Seo-hyun met his gaze. Then the crown prince stepped forward. His posture was regal, his eyes clear, For centuries, Seo-hyun said, the crown has symbolized continuity and stability. But stability is not stagnation. And continuity does not require silence. The room stilled. I have always upheld my duty to the nation. I will continue to do so. My personal life does not alter my constitutional role. A pause. Then, softer. I do not believe love threatens a nation. I believe fear does. The silence that followed was profound. Not chaos, not outrage, just shock. Seo-hyun glanced briefly at Ji-won. Then he did something no crown prince had ever done on live broadcast. He reached out and took the president's hand. Not tightly, not defiantly, simply, naturally. The cameras exploded. Somewhere in the back, someone swore under their breath. But neither of them looked away. Ji-won's fingers intertwined with Seo-hyun's. No crown, no title, just two men, choosing. By nightfall, protests and celebrations both filled the streets. Approval ratings shifted unpredictably. Parliament convened emergency sessions. International leaders issued carefully worded statements. But inside the private garden, they stood together beneath the roses. The world had not ended. It had cracked. And through that crack, light. Ji-won looked at Seo-hyun, exhaustion finally catching up to him. You realize, Ji-won murmured, we just rewrote history. Seo-hyun's lips curved faintly. History was overdue for revision. Ji-won laughed softly, then sobered. Are you afraid? Seo-hyun considered. Yes. Ji-won squeezed his hand. Good, he said gently. So am I. They stood in shared vulnerability. And for the first time, their love was not a secret. But it was no longer safe. Because tomorrow, the consequences would begin. And crowns, once cracked, rarely remain whole. Part 10. When the empire came home. 3 months. That's how long it took. 3 months of restructuring meetings, internal investigations, policy reversals, shareholder confrontations, and headlines that alternated between Seo's reckless reform and JK Holdings enters new ethical era. Min barely slept, but he didn't waver, because every time exhaustion tried to drag him back into old habits, cold efficiency, emotional detachment, he remembered something simple. Fireflies over rice fields, flour on Haenul's cheek, a bowl of seaweed soup placed quietly in front of him. He wasn't reforming the company to prove something. He was reforming it so he could live with himself. The final confrontation came on a rainy afternoon. Yura's father sat across from him in the boardroom. You're dismantling the structure that made this empire powerful, the older man said coldly. I'm correcting the parts that made it rotten, Min replied calmly. You're doing this because of that man. Min didn't deny it. He reminded me I'm human. A scoff. Human leaders get eaten. Min leaned back slightly. Not if they're still strong. Silence. Because the truth was obvious. Profits hadn't collapsed. In fact, long-term projections were stabilizing. Employee retention was improving. Public trust was rising. The empire hadn't fallen. It had evolved. The vote passed that evening. Unanimous. Kang Ji-hyun remained CEO. Not because of fear, but because he had proven he could lead differently. That night, he didn't go to his penthouse. He didn't attend celebratory dinners. He drove, past city lights, past highways, towards somewhere quieter. Morning Dew Diner looked exactly the same. Faded sign, wooden door, 6 tables. Haenul was arguing with the rice cooker again. Some things never changed. The bell above the door chimed. Haenul didn't look up immediately. We're closed for another. He froze. Min stood there, not in a full suit this time. Simple black shirt, sleeves rolled, tired, but steady. You're late, Haenul said softly. Min smiled. I had something to finish. They stood there for a second that felt longer than 3 months. Then Haenul walked forward. No dramatic run, no tears, just certainty. You came back. I said I would. Min stepped closer. The board approved everything, he said quietly. The engagement contract has been legally dissolved. Yura is free. Haenul blinked. And you? Min looked around the diner. At the small cracks in the walls. At the uneven floorboards. At the sunlight filtering through thin curtains. I'm free too. They sat outside again that evening. Same steps, same fields, but everything felt different. Not fragile, not borrowed, real. You know, Haenul said, nudging him lightly, you don't have to choose between here and there. Min looked at him. I don't. No. Just don't forget this place when you're there. Min reached for his hand, openly, without hesitation. I won't, he said. A pause. I want to invest in rural communities, Min added. Fair supplier contracts, small business protections. Haenul laughed softly. You're turning my village into a corporate pilot project. No, Min said. I'm making sure no one can crush it the way they tried to crush you. That was love too, not just soft words, but action. A week later, a small plaque appeared quietly inside the diner. Not flashy, just simple. Morning Dew Diner, Community Partner, JK Holdings. Haenul rolled his eyes when he saw it. You're impossible. Min leaned against the counter. I'm efficient. Haenul walked closer. You're different. Min smiled faintly. I remember who I was, he said. And I know who I want to be. And that is. Min looked at him the way he had that first night under the fireflies. Soft. Certain. Yours. The word wasn't ownership. It was choice. That night, they lay side by side in the small room behind the diner. Window open. Wind gentle. No cameras. No boardrooms. No noise. Just quiet breathing. Min stared at the wooden ceiling that had once felt unfamiliar. Now it felt like peace. I didn't lose my memory, he murmured. Haenul shifted sleepily. What? I think I lost the version of me that didn't know how to love. Haenul smiled in the dark. Good. Outside, the field swayed gently. In the city, skyscrapers still glittered. The empire still stood, but it no longer owned its king. Because Kang Ji-hyun had learned something no market could measure. Power built empires. Love made them worth ruling. Epilogue. A different kind of legacy. 5 years later, the capital did not tremble when Seo-hyun ascended the throne. It celebrated, not because controversy had been forgotten, but because it had been transformed. The coronation of King Seo-hyun was broadcast across the nation and beyond. Gold-threaded banners draped palace balconies. Church bells rang in layered harmony. Military formations moved with precise choreography across the grand courtyard. Tradition unfolded exactly as it had for centuries. But history had shifted. Seated in the front row, clearly visible, deliberately placed, was former President Kang Ji-hyun. Not hidden in a shadowed balcony. Not described as a guest of honor, with vague diplomatic language. Simply named, simply acknowledged. The cameras did not avoid him. They lingered. When the archbishop lifted the crown, the hall fell silent. When it descended onto Seo-hyun's head, a new era formally began. But before the applause swelled, before the orchestra rose, before the ceremonial cannons fired, Seo-hyun's gaze moved, not to the foreign dignitaries, not to parliament, not even to his father seated in solemn pride. It moved to Ji-hyun. And Ji-hyun, standing among presidents and prime ministers, did not bow like a subject alone. He bowed like a partner. The gesture was subtle, but unmistakable. The years between scandal and coronation had not been simple. They had been deliberate. After stepping down from office, Ji-hyun did not disappear into private luxury. Instead, he accepted a quiet advisory role in international mediation, working on cross-border climate agreements and democratic reform initiatives. Without electoral pressure, he moved more freely, no longer calculating for campaign cycles, but for long-term impact. He and Seo-hyun had learned something crucial during those turbulent months. Love could not exist only in defiance. It had to exist in construction. So they built, not laws centered on themselves, but reforms that strengthened institutional transparency. The monarchy's constitutional language was clarified to modernize definitions of personal autonomy. Ethical oversight committees were expanded. Public education campaigns focused on civic resilience and evolving democratic values. None of it screamed revolution. But all of it mattered. Public trust did not skyrocket overnight. It grew slowly, organically. The initial outrage softened into dialogue. Dialogue became familiarity. Familiarity became acceptance. And acceptance, over time, became normalcy. By the time the coronation arrived, their relationship was no longer breaking news. It was part of the national story. That evening, after ceremonies concluded and formal banquets dissolved into quiet corridors, Seo-hyun finally stepped into his private chamber. The crown felt heavier in his hands than it had on his head. Gold, velvet, centuries of expectation. He set it carefully onto its stand. Behind him, the door closed softly. Ji-hyun entered without announcement. Some privileges did not require titles. They stood in silence for a moment, absorbing the stillness that follows monumental days. Your Majesty, Ji-hyun teased gently. Seo-hyun exhaled a soft laugh. Don't. Ji-hyun stepped closer, his expression warm. I remember when you told me crowns crack under pressure. Seo-hyun turned to face him. And I remember when you said power is stewardship. Ji-hyun glanced at the crown. Does it feel heavier now? Seo-hyun considered carefully. No, he said at last. It feels clearer. Clearer. I know who I am beneath it. Ji-hyun's eyes softened. That had been the real battle all along, not public approval, not political backlash. Identity. Seo-hyun stepped closer. There was a time, he admitted quietly, when I believed loving you would cost the crown its strength. And now I understand that strength without authenticity is fragile. Ji-won smiled faintly. You always did learn quickly. Seo-hyun's hand found his. No cameras, no historians recording posture, just warmth. I did not kneel to love, Seo-hyun said softly. I chose it standing. Ji-won's breath caught slightly. And I did not abandon power, Ji-won replied. I redefined it. They stood together, not as rebellion, not as scandal, but as evolution. Outside, the city glittered. Inside, the weight of history felt manageable. Years later, textbooks would describe King Seo-hyun as the monarch who modernized the crown's public identity without dismantling its foundation. They would describe former President Kang Ji-won as the leader who voluntarily relinquished office at the height of influence, an act scholars would debate for decades. But rarely would those textbooks capture the quiet truths. The nights they argued over policy drafts at the kitchen table. The mornings they drank tea before separate state obligations. The careful negotiation of space between ceremony and intimacy. Legacy is often written in marble and ink. But theirs was written in endurance. In patience. In the refusal to let institutions dictate the boundaries of their humanity. One late autumn evening, years into Seo-hyun's reign, they walked again in the palace garden where everything had once been secret. The roses were blooming. Ji-won looked around thoughtfully. Do you ever miss the secrecy? He asked. Seo-hyun raised an eyebrow. You miss hiding. Ji-won chuckled softly. It had its thrill. Seo-hyun stopped walking and turned to him fully. I don't miss fear, he said. I don't miss calculating whether a touch could destabilize a nation. Ji-won nodded. Neither did he. Seo-hyun reached for his hand openly. Guards saw. Staff noticed. No one reacted. The world had adjusted, and in that adjustment, something profound had happened. The crown had not collapsed. The republic had not fractured. The sky had not fallen. Instead, two men had loved each other publicly. And the nation had survived it. More than survived, it had matured. Seo-hyun looked at Ji-won beneath the fading sunlight. History will decide what we meant, he said quietly. Ji-won squeezed his hand. No, he corrected gently. We already decided. The wind moved through the roses. Above them, the sky deepened into indigo. A king, a former president, two lives once defined by title, now defined by choice. Their legacy was not a scandal, not a sacrifice, not even reform. It was proof that power does not have to demand loneliness. That leadership does not require erasure of the self, and that even the most rigid traditions can bend, not under force, but under love. If you like the story, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notifications for more amazing stories.